President Biden has proposed a massive investment in U.S. infrastructure as part of his aggressive policy agenda, asking Congress to fund $2 trillion in a wide-ranging set of investments from roads, bridges, and waterways to electrification, broadband, the water system, and health care. But with a sharply divided Congress, which, if any, of the president's proposals will move forward? Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us in this special episode coming to you live from Des Moines, Iowa. This episode is sponsored by Central Life Sciences. Get control of flies on your dairy operation with an integrated pest management program built around Clarifly, Larvicide, and Starbar products from Central Life Sciences. Clarifly Larvicide offers feed-through control that prevents the emergence of nuisance flies from the manure of treated animals by as much as 96%. And Starbar features a lineup of baits, traps, and sprays that address fly problems in all areas of your dairy operation. Flies can spread disease and lead to decreases in milk quality and yields. Learn how to limit their impact at centralflycontrol.com. Earlier this week at World Pork Expo in Des Moines, Iowa, I had a chance to catch up with Mike Steenhoek of the Soy Transportation Coalition about the president's infrastructure bill and the latest wrangling over the package in Washington, including a bipartisan proposal that would be a bit more modest in scope. So, Mike, we've had a chance over the past couple months to talk about a lot of different transportation issues. I want to hit the ground running here. We've been having discussions in Washington about the role infrastructure will play in President Biden's administration and his policy agenda. I understand there are some discussions going on this week while we're here in Des Moines. What's happening on the hand door between Congress and the president, and what's it mean for folk who are looking to move agricultural goods on the U.S. rail, waterway, road system, et cetera?
Well, the president a few months ago made his opening bid, and that was a $2.3 trillion proposal. $621 billion of that $2.3 trillion could be classified as transportation infrastructure. And then the Republican Senate made a counteroffer of a $568 billion proposal. And then negotiations ensued from that, and the Republicans eventually raised their offer to $928 billion. The president brought his down considerably as well. And the real goal for the Republicans is to try to keep it as focused on what most Americans would regard as transportation infrastructure, and also extending to things like rural broadband and drinking water and those kind of things, electricity grid, those kind of things. And so, but unfortunately, the talks have broken off between the ranking Republican, Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, and the president. And so what the president has now done is he's then changed tactics to have negotiations with a small bipartisan group of senators, both Republicans and Democrats, to hopefully forge a way forward. And so that's what we're currently looking at. But as of today, the announcement was that the Republicans have said we will not adhere to increased taxes on corporations to pay for this. So that's going to be a big sticking point. So bottom line, negotiations will continue.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because we're not necessarily just dickering over the details of how we spend the money, but how we pay for whatever we spend. That's kind of part of that bigger proposal that has maybe bogged things down a bit. Is that a good read?
Yeah, absolutely. Even in our personal life, the easiest thing to do is to get out the credit card and spend.
Right.
The hardest thing to do is actually to write the check with invoices in the mail, and that's always been the dilemma when talking about infrastructure in Washington, D.C. There's a long list of things that we would like to do, but what always becomes the challenge is how are you going to pay for it? And so that's really one of the big points of debate right now. And also, there's the discussion about to what extent are you going to add things to this bill that really, again, fall outside the bell curve when most Americans think about infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, those kind of things that, there's broad bipartisan agreement on that. But once you start adding some of these other items, even if they're important,
right,
the probability of passage actually goes down rather than up. And so my advice all along has been, let's keep it focused on transportation infrastructure. There's a bipartisan win that is on the table. We would love to see the president and Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, embrace that opportunity.
Yeah, and is that your read? As I've been kind of following the horse trading here, it feels like there is pretty bipartisan support for what you describe as traditional infrastructure and the roads, rails, bridges, waterways, and so on. how hard would it be to get that across the goal line? Is there an appetite among Democrats and Republicans to play ball together on something that might fit that more narrow definition? Or does the president have to get a win here on a bigger package?
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of unfortunate, and this is an indictment on both Republicans and Democrats over the years, that in the real world, when you have an agreement between two parties, the conclusion is, great, we have agreement, let's get it done. In Washington, D.C., if there's agreement between two parties, then one party in power says, great, there's an agreement, let's attach some controversial things onto it and try to have that pull this entirety across the finish line. And so that's what we're having, is some of these more controversial topics have been attached to something where there is strong bipartisan agreement. And Republicans are saying, no, let's keep it focused on infrastructure. The White House, all of a sudden you're having this semantic discussion about what infrastructure even is in the first place.
Right.
And so as a result, it's become larger and as a result, more controversial.
So if you had to put a confidence on it, like how confident are you that A, something will happen, B, that it will happen in, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months, and that whatever happens will be something that we in agriculture will be relatively happy with?
I think there's a real high probability that something gets done within the next couple months. I mean, the question is, do they do it in a bipartisan fashion, or do Democrats, led by the president, go at it alone, which will then become a much larger multi-trillion-dollar bill where they're attaching all of these other items. And so that's, I think, is the real big question. I don't think the president is going to allow nothing to happen. So I think something will happen. And from an agricultural perspective, there are some things, there's obviously a much larger comprehensive bill, but there are ingredients to that which would be beneficial to our industry, whether it's from the president's proposal or for the Republican Senate proposal. Things like replacing 10,000 bridges, many of them in rural areas. That's a big need for agriculture. Things like investing in the inland waterway system. It's always a good day when you have both the president and Congress talking about the needs of the inland waterways, because that's been widely ignored over the years. Right. So there are some things that give us some degree of optimism. Again, we just think keep it focused on transportation infrastructure and maybe some of these other infrastructure areas, and get something done in a bipartisan fashion.
Reporters don't always like to ask questions they don't know the answer to, but I'm going to go out and ask one I don't know the answer to. So when you talk about those thousands of bridges, the lack of investment in the inland waterway system, locks and dams and so on, if you had to prioritize, where do we work the most of all those different things in our traditional transportation logistics infrastructure grid? Where's the most pain right now? Where could some additional federal spending on this scale make the biggest dent?
Yeah, I think there's a two-part answer to that. I think the mode of transportation that receives the least amount of tender-loving care and attention is our rural roads and bridges, and it's easy to neglect those. And that's the mode of transportation that's most relatable to farmers. It's the area of the country where when you talk about rural roads and bridges, the problem is most pronounced, but resources are the most restricted or on the decline. So it's clearly our rural roads and bridges, but what keeps you awake at night is if you had a major failure at a key lock and dam of significant duration, because our inland waterway system, it's a linear system. It's not like if you have a breakdown on a road or a bridge, you take a detour. Right. It might be an expensive detour, but you can still nonetheless take a detour. Yeah. On our inland waterway system, you cannot take a detour around that. So things will just continue to choke up. And we saw, even though if it was just 3 days in duration, you had that bridge closure that still remains in Memphis, but they closed barge transportation for 3 days. Over those 3 days alone, you had over 1,000 barges back up. Yeah. And so it just shows the power and the importance of that system, and we've got to make sure we maintain that appropriately.
Well, and we had the example of the Suez Canal closure. We had you on the program to talk about that. I mean, that was another real-world example, not related to infrastructure per se, but when one of these major waterways gets shut down for whatever reason, has real implications. A part of me would have thought, and especially the bridge example you used, part of me would have thought that might have spurred some additional action, because you could just point and say, look, here it is. that doesn't necessarily seem to have been a catalyst like I thought it might.
Yeah, and that was kind of a surprise to me because nothing motivates like a catastrophe.
Right.
And you did see with the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis when that collapsed, all of a sudden that galvanized a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And also with Hurricane Katrina, people had talked about the need to improve the levee system in New Orleans for years, but all of a sudden you had this catastrophe, and all of a sudden it really spurred further action. I do think there is some more energy. It's insufficient, but we have had a number of occasions like the Suez Canal, the Colonial Pipeline. While that was a cyber attack, it did point to the importance of our critical infrastructure and how it can touch so many Americans. And then also with the bridge in Memphis. So it has provided some degree of additional energy into this discussion, but it's still insufficient. We still need to make that case.
I want to circle back on another topic we've covered with you in the past, not related to this particular policy arena, but still vital important, and that's the situation with container shipments and the critical shortage of containers. How is that situation playing out now? It's probably been a month or 6 weeks since we last talked about it with you. Are we still seeing those same kinds of shortages and U.S. shippers of agricultural goods having trouble with ocean-going vessels?
Unfortunately, it's still persisting, and this is not something that you can just simply turn on a dime and make it go away. We had this unexpected, unanticipated surge in spending directed almost exclusively into goods and excluding services for a significant period of time. And now we're starting to see that rebound a bit in the services area, like vacations, like restaurants and those kind of things, movies, those types of things. But there's still this significant amount of demand on manufacturing and production. And then as a result, a significant demand on the logistics that handles it. So you really can't see an element of the supply chain that's not under significant stress. You see it manifest at our ports, you see it on our rail system, you see it with container availability, the ocean liners themselves. We have long had a problem with truck driver availability. We've always had a persistent shortage of truck drivers that has only become exacerbated because of this current situation. So unfortunately, the prognosis is this is going to remain with us for a considerable period of time, I think easily throughout 2021, because we're not far from all of a sudden retailers having to build their stocks for the holiday season. That usually is an activity that happens in the late summer. Right. So all of a sudden there's a normal surge in shipping during that time anyway. So agriculture is one of those industries that's being adversely affected by this. Certainly every industry that I'm aware of is struggling with this. Agriculture certainly is one of them.
For the latest breaking news in food animal and animal feed production, including what's happening in Washington and our ongoing coverage of the infrastructure bill, subscribe to the Feedstuffs Daily e-newsletter or visit our website and social media channels for more. This episode has been brought to you by Central Life Sciences. Get control of flies on your dairy operation with an integrated pest management program built around Clarifly larvicide and Starbar products from Central Life Sciences. Clarifly larvicide offers feed-through control that prevents the emergence of nuisance flies from the manure of treated animals by as much as 96%. And Starbar features a lineup of baits, traps, and sprays that address fly problems in all areas of your dairy operation. Flies can spread disease and lead to decreases in milk quality and yields. Learn how to limit their impact at centralflycontrol.com. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple and Google Podcasts, or just visit our website, feedstuffs.com, for more future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.